Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to another session of the NSF Virtual Grants Conference. Before we begin, we're going to take a quick poll to find out a little bit more about you. You want to make sure that you're using Zoom from within the Zoom application. Otherwise, you may not be able to see the poll. If you have questions during this session, we ask that you submit them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please keep in mind, we're going to try and answer all of your questions, but there are a lot of people in attendance, so it's possible we're not able to answer all of them, but we're going to do our best. We are recording this session, and it will be made available on our website, nsfpolicyoutreach.com, in the coming weeks, and we will be sending an email notice as soon as the sessions have been posted. If you experience any technical difficulties during this presentation, just let us know in the Q&A and someone will be able to assist you. Thank you for participating in our poll. And I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover the Major Research Instrumentation Program, or MRI. And this session will be presented by Randy Phelps from the NSF Office of Integrative Activities.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session on the Major Research Instrumentation Program with a guest appearance by the Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure Program. My name is Randy Phelps. I'm a staff associate in the Office of Integrative Activities at NSF, and our office coordinates the overall MRI program, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next number of slides. So next slide, please. So I've divided the presentation up into several parts, and the first part is to talk about the basics of MRI. Next slide, please. So MRI has some strategic goals, and they're listed here, and it's what most people are familiar with. It's the acquisition or the development of a major shared use research instrument. There are a lot of words here, and all of them have some pretty important meanings. So acquisition, my cartoon sketch is that you take a grocery cart to your local Best Buy, and you go up and down the aisles until you find your favorite 500 megahertz NMR, and you put it in the cart, and you go through the checkout line, and you go back to your lab, and you plug it in, and you're off and running. That's obviously a cartoon scenario. And development is that Best Buy doesn't have what you're after because you need higher resolution, higher throughput, whatever the capability may be, and it doesn't exist at a vendor. So you have to design what you're planning to need, and you have to go to the shop and build components to this new instrument. And ultimately, you put it all together and you find out that it isn't as successful as you had intended, and therefore you go back to the beginning or you tweak the designs that you had, and eventually you've developed a new instrument with capabilities that didn't exist before, and perhaps you can commercialize that instrument, maybe not. So that's my cartoon sketch of what development is about. The other pieces of this paragraph that are important are the word A. So it's the acquisition or development of a major shared use research instrument. An MRI proposal can request an instrument, not instruments, but a major instrument, one per proposal. Also, the major shared use research instrument is important. Shared use being the more who can use the instrument to keep the instrument running 24/7, 365 days a year is all the better. And reviewers will look at how many people are using an instrument. Also, too costly or not appropriate for support through other NSF programs. There are some other NSF instrumentation programs. If they are appropriate for your proposal, it may be better to submit your idea to those particular programs. So keep in mind all of these words when you're considering an MRI proposal. And it's important to note, too, that the instrument is expected to be operational for regular research use by the end of the award period. The "and" part on this slide is also important. because an MRI proposal, an MRI instrument, enables academic departments, disciplinary and cross-disciplinary units, and multi-organization collaborations to integrate research with research training. You probably have heard the phrase integrate research with education at NSF, which has been around for many years. But here we refer to a very specific type of education, and that is research training. MRI is a research instrumentation program, but we also want you to train the next generation of scientists and engineers in the use or the development of research instruments. Education and outreach, as you'll see, is an important part, perhaps, of your proposal for MRI, but it is they are broader impacts of a proposal and don't necessarily constitute the research training component. Next slide, please. So I just want to highlight here some ongoing discussions that have happened both internally at NSF and externally with the community. One of them is the submission window, and as you will hear at this grants conference, the end date of a submission window effectively is a deadline date. And for many, many years, the deadline date, the end date of a submission window for MRI has been in January. There's been a lot of discussion, both internally and externally, about having the MRI deadline be switched from January to the fall sometime. So that facilitates internal processes that require us to get awards made earlier rather than later, and also helps the external community, that is you, the faculty, and your sponsored research offices, to get proposals to NSF before the holidays, as opposed to right after everyone returns, just after the first of the year. So that's a series of ongoing discussions we're having at NSF, both and with the external community. I've already mentioned instrument development, and clearly NSF as a catalyst for research advancing the frontiers would love to be able to fund more instrument development proposals to get new types of instruments that don't currently exist, and MRI is a good mechanism to do that. So the MRI program continues to seek new ways to encourage proposals for instrument development. And of course, broadening the portfolio is a key priority for our current director, the National Science Board, and Congress. So MRI continues to encourage proposals from women PIs, underrepresented minorities, persons with disabilities, and early career PIs, as well as proposals that benefit early career researchers, geographically underserved regions, including EPSCoR jurisdictions. If you're in an EPSCoR jurisdiction, you know what that means. And under-resourced institutions, a phrase that's becoming more common, including emerging research institutions. Next slide, please. So I'm highlighting again instrument development. So this is something that you should keep in mind, that we really want to encourage MRI awards that develop the next generation of research instruments that open new frontiers of research and perhaps can be commercialized in partnership with the private sector. Partnerships is a big mantra at NSF these days as well. So up to a third of the MRI awards are expected to support instrument development in any track. Remember, MRI has tracks for submissions. So within the submission limits, we encourage organizations strongly to consider submitting instrument development proposals as among those that are submitted within the submission limits of an organization. Next slide, please. But this is what you're probably wanting to hear about. That is the upcoming MRI competition. With a January deadline, the solicitation would normally be out. But we have not been able to get the solicitation out quite so quickly because of the Chips and Science Act of 2022 that had some guidance for the MRI program, and therefore the new solicitation will have some significant changes with respect to previous years. What I can tell you at the moment is listed here in the bullets, and it's not very detailed, I know, but I'll come back to that in the next slide. But be comforted, I hope, that proposals will be due no earlier than 90 days after the posting of the solicitation. So as soon as the solicitation comes out, and we're hoping that will be in the next several weeks at the latest, you will have at least 90 days before the submission deadline to submit your proposal. And those proposals, by the way, need to be submitted through research.gov or grants.gov. Fast lane submissions are no longer a possibility, so it will be through grants.gov, or I recommend research.gov for the submission of your MRI proposals. And it's important to note that the PAP guide, which you'll be hearing a lot about during this research conference, the new PAP guide NSF 23-1 will apply for proposals submitted or due on or after January 30th, 2023. And given that the solicitation has not yet been posted for MRI, it's guaranteed that the deadline will be after January 30th, 2023. Next slide, please. So again, for the upcoming competition, you're probably wanting to know some of the details of what's in the new solicitation. And there I have to say that I cannot tell you at the moment. At the time of this recording, the solicitation has not been posted, and details cannot be revealed before it is actually posted. But what I can say is what I've already said, is that the Chips and Science Act of 2022 had some sections that specifically referred to the Major Research Instrumentation Program. And if you're interested, NSF has paid close attention to those requirements in the Chips and Science Act. And in particular, the sections relevant to MRI are listed here. Section 10318 deals with the microelectronics workforce. Section 10320 is something that a lot of people are hearing through the grapevine, and that is dealing with cost sharing, where the guidance in the Chips and Science Act waives the cost sharing requirement for 5 years for the MRI program. And also Section 10373 deals with helium conservation and using the MRI program for projects that deal with the conservation of helium. How NSF is implementing this guidance, I cannot tell you until the solicitation comes out. But if you have some interest in understanding what the guidance is, please look up online the Chips and Science Act and find these particular sections. Next slide, please. So one thing that MRI has done in the past and will likely continue in the new solicitation is requiring that institutions classify what type of institution they are. There are many ways of classifying institutions through the Carnegie classifications, etc. But for many years, MRI has required these classifications as a PhD granting institution of higher education, a non-PhD granting institution of higher education, or a non-degree granting organization. And they are based on the number of PhDs that are awarded in the previous 2 years. So institutions that award 20 PhDs or more in the previous 2 years, are classified as PhD granting institutions of higher education. Non-PhD granting institutions of higher education award fewer than 20 PhDs in the previous 2 years, but award bachelor's or associate's degrees or master's degrees in NSF supported fields. And if those two categories don't apply, institutions that do not award associates, bachelor's, master's degrees, and or PhDs are considered to be non-degree granting organizations, or if you award degrees outside of NSF supported fields. One thing that's just important to note is that organizations that are not non-PhD granting are not, well, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Organizations that are not PhD granting are not necessarily non-PhD granting. So that note at the bottom is important. Non-degree granting organizations are a separate class. So keep that in mind and take a close look at the guidance that's provided here on this slide. Next slide. So the next section that I'd like to talk about is the review process. It's something that everyone is not familiar with, but it is important when you're submitting a proposal to know how your proposal will be dealt with at NSF and who you'll be competing against in the review process at NSF. So next slide, please. So it's important to find a home at NSF. In red are listed here the NSF directorates. So there are 8 directorates when you include the TIP directorate. They are akin to colleges within universities. So there's a bioscience directorate, computer information science and engineering, geoscience, mathematical and physical sciences, social, behavioral, and economic sciences, and education and human resources, which is now the EDU directorate. Divisions within the directorates are akin to departments. So within the mathematical and physical sciences directorate, for example, there's a chemistry division, there's a materials research division, astronomical sciences, and by the way, I'm an astronomer by training, mathematical sciences division, and a physics division. There we go, I got them. So there are 5 divisions within the MPS directorate. So it's important to find a home at NSF, and when you go to the NSF webpage, if you find the organizational chart, all the directorates are listed, as are the divisions and the programs within the division. So it's just important to get to know the NSF website and find where you belong within the organizational chart of NSF. Next slide, please. And I say that because in the upper right are other offices that you don't usually interact with. You may interact with our Office of International Science and Engineering, for example. But another office is the Office of Integrative Activities. And that's an office that is within the director's office, but you don't necessarily deal with it all the time. We do run some programs like MRI, and proposals are actually submitted to OIA. That is, MRI proposals are submitted to OIA. But you have to submit as a secondary consideration which division or divisions you prefer to have your proposal reviewed within. So OIA is responsible for compliance checking of the proposals and portfolio monitoring of the overall program, but we do not review your proposals. So your proposal will come to OIA just because it is a program coordinated by OIA, but you do need to select a preference or preferences for the review of your proposal, and OIA is not one of those divisions where your proposal will be reviewed. So please do not select OIA as your secondary program or programs. Okay. So we do the compliance checking, and then we distribute the proposals to the various divisions, largely based on where the PI has indicated that they are most relevant to be reviewed. However, NSF reserves the right to place proposals in the proper home. So in each competition, there are about 20 or so proposals that get shifted into a more appropriate NSF division for the proposal review. And just as an example, many PIs who do materials research are located in physics departments, but NSF physics doesn't deal with materials research to any large extent anyway, because we have a materials research division within the MPS directorate. And additionally, our engineering directorate has several divisions, and most of them deal at some level with materials research. So if it's a more applied materials research proposal, it may end up in an engineering division, or if it's pure materials research, it may end up in our DMR materials research division, even though you as a PI may reside in a physics department. So NSF is structured slightly different than many universities, but we do reserve the right to have your proposal reviewed where it is most appropriate. But you may also select more than one division. If you're in biochemistry, for example, and there's a lot of chemistry and a lot of bio, you may have a hard time figuring out where it belongs. It may belong in both, and it may be co-reviewed in two different divisions. So help NSF by saying which division or divisions are most appropriate for the review of your proposal. So it's the divisions that recommend awards with our concurrence to make sure that everything is okay as an MRI award. But we do not in OIA see the declines. Those decisions are made within the division. So it really is, even though it's an OIA coordinated program, it is a bottom-up program in the sense of the review where divisions, where the expertise resides for the review of your proposal. Remember, I said I'm an astronomer by training. You don't want me coordinating the review of a proposal in any other discipline, for example. But it's important to know how the proposals are reviewed. We do in OIA, I put here, holds the MRI budget provided by Congress. That is, we co-fund, even if it's 100%, all the awards. So the awards, when they are recommended, come to my office, our office, and we look them over to make sure they're compatible with MRI, and then co-fund the proposal up to 100%. So in this sense, we allocate funds to all of the divisions based on the dollar value of the proposals that each division is reviewing. So in that sense, there's a comparable success rate by all divisions at NSF to first order along the way. However, division funds are further siloed, and this is an important point, that's why I've got an arrow here, are further siloed by the percentage of proposals from two different categories. One is non-PhD granting institutions and minority serving institutions. So there's a pot of money within a division's allocation that is reserved for non-PhD granting institutions and minority serving institutions and can only be spent on those types of institutions. And then there's another pot that can be used for any type of institution, but is typically used for PhD or non-degree granting organizations. So in this sense, within each division, there is a comparable success rate by institution type. And that is important because if you are at a non-PhD granting institution, you are competing against your peer level institutions, not against Research 1 Carnegie classification institution, if in fact you are at a non-PhD granting institution as defined by the MRI program. So you need to write your proposal for the strengths of your institution, in the capacity of what is expected at your institution and how you compete against your peer level institutions. All the money for MRI, I should point out, is not reserved for allocation to all the divisions in the way that I've just described. There is some amount of money, roughly $20 million or so, that is reserved for large meritorious directorate level priorities. As I mentioned, how the divisions review proposals depends on the culture of those fields, I should say. But it's important to note that many divisions, in order to make a reasonable success rate, will fund the smaller awards to the exclusion of the larger awards. So we reserve money that is dedicated exclusively for large awards so that meritorious large awards will get funded. And in particular, if a directorate doesn't receive an allocation that's particularly large based on proposal pressure, they may not be able to make a large award, even if it was rated as one of the highest rated proposals in the entire competition. So we have a reserve for large proposals. So if you submit a large proposal, there is a good chance, if it reviews well, that it will get funded. And also our office in OIA, the Office of Integrative Activity, holds a small reserve for portfolio balance in case some proposals that are multidisciplinary review well in one discipline, but not so much in the other, that we still may be able to fund it just because it's an important contribution to advancing interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary research, or even transdisciplinary. Some divisions also use their own program funds to support MRI, and EPSCoR also contributes money. So when I mentioned that there's a comparable success rate by divisions, plus or minus, it may vary a little bit based on the contributions that come from funds outside of the MRI program. Next slide, please. So in this section, I'd just like to give some advice about best practices when you're writing proposals. So next slide. And there are a lot of things here to take into consideration. And the title pretty much says it all, and that is to understand NSF before considering a proposal. If you're not familiar with NSF, it's very difficult to say, I'm going to write a proposal for this upcoming deadline, which is February or whatever deadline it's going to be, because you don't have an idea of how to start from the very beginning. So my recommendation to you is to take heed of all of these bullets here, perhaps even a year before you're considering a proposal, just so that your proposal, when you submit it, you have a good understanding of how to go about doing it. So the first thing is to know the NSF website, www.nsf.gov, and you'll hear a lot about the NSF website in this grants conference. Also search recent awards and use the advanced search feature at the top of the NSF webpage is the search tab, and there's an option for an advanced search, and there you can enter the program element, or it's referred to as the element code. And for the major research instrumentation program, it's 1189. And you can see what over the last number of years, if you have, there's an active and an expired button. If you click both of them, you'll see what active and expired awards NSF has funded over the last number of years. And you can enter a keyword to find out what particular type of instrument, for example, has been funded by this program. So if you look for NMR, you're going to find an awful lot of them. Mass spectrometer, you might find quite a few of those as well, or atomic force microscope. You'll see what we have funded in that area. Okay. Also, identify appropriate programs or links within, as I've already mentioned, the organization list. So at the top of the NSF webpage here, www.nsf.gov, to the right-hand side, you can find a tab that gives you an organization list. And within that organization list, you'll find the directorates and the divisions, as I've already alluded to. But within those divisions, you can find programs. And within the programs, you'll find the program staff, and you can find which program officer is best to talk to about your possible program. NSF program officers are generally busy, but we're there to help prospective PIs with advice about submitting proposals. So when I have the next bullet is talk to the program officers in divisions and programs where you fit. Also know the proposal and award policies and procedures guide, the PAP guide. Again, you're hearing a lot about the PAP guide during this grants conference. It is the general guidance for submitting proposals to NSF, along with solicitations. Solicitations generally have additional guidance, and they overrule the guidance in the PAP guide, or at least supersede if there's a conflict between the solicitation and the PAP guide. But overall, you need to understand what the general rules are for submitting a proposal to NSF, and that's housed in the PAP guide. And you also need to be aware of what the specific guidance is for a program in the program solicitation. Also, if you have the opportunity, serve as a panelist, and you're going to hear this an awful lot. There's no better way to understand how proposals are reviewed at NSF than as serving as a panelist. Keep in mind, again, that panelists and reviewers provide guidance to NSF program officers, and program officers make recommendations to their division directors, and division directors sign off, but it goes to our division of grants and agreements. So there's a long process, even outside of the panel or review process, before an award is actually made. Also talk to successful PIs and get advice from them. Within your college or university, you probably have somebody or someone, many people, who have successfully applied to NSF. They may or may not be willing to give you a copy of their successful proposal. They're under no obligation to do so. Don't tell them that Randy Phelps said, give me a copy of your successful proposal, but that is an option that they may allow. And you can see what makes, or at least hear about what makes for a successful proposal from the viewpoint of a successful PI. And also know NSF's role compared to other federal agencies. As I mentioned, I'm an astronomer, so NASA is a funder of folks in my field. In the biosciences, NIH is the 65,000-pound gorilla in the room, but NSF tries to fund bioactivities that are not typically funded by NIH. So we fund more basic research in the biosciences, but there may be possible overlap in a minimal way, especially with the advanced technologies that are related to health sciences. So keep in mind that different agencies have different missions, and it's important to know whether your proposal is better targeted toward NIH or whether it is appropriate for NSF, for example. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that I often get is what makes a MRI proposal competitive? Notice here I say what makes an MRI proposal competitive rather than successful, because in large part, budgets preclude us from funding all of the meritorious proposals that come to the MRI program. Remember that MRI is a limited submission competition, so many competitive proposals don't even reach NSF because they are self-selected by the university to come to NSF, and not all proposals that PIs would like to submit to NSF will make it to the competition. Even then, the MRI program entertains about 700 to 800 proposals in a given competition, and we simply don't have the budget to fund all of the meritorious proposals that make it to us. So strong proposals may not get funded. And one of the examples I often get is as researchers, those of you who out there are faculty members, you're researchers, you write a research paper and submit it to a journal, and if it's reviewed well by the peer reviewers, they may have some additional comments and you make the corrections and you resubmit it and it comes back to the editor of the journal. And the editor says, fine, we'll put this in the next monthly installment of our research journal. And instead of the journal being this thick, the journal is that thick. So that's a possibility when you're writing research papers. The journals will have a various thickness. For MRI and grants proposals in general, the thickness is fixed. That is, the budget for the program is fixed. So when you submit a proposal and it, for example, it doesn't quite make the cut, and the reviewers come back with ideas and you make comments in your proposal to improve your proposal for the next competition and you resubmit it. That doesn't mean that it's going to fit within the next competition either. So proposals need to be competitive, but they aren't necessarily going to be successful, even if you rehash the proposal to make it more and more compelling. So next slide, please. So what I can recommend, though, is for you to think not just as a PI trying to convince somebody of the merits of your proposal. Think like a reviewer. Oftentimes you will give your proposal to someone to look at it, and that's a good idea if you're willing to do that. But as you're writing your proposal, think like a reviewer. That is, what story would you want to hear? This is an instrumentation program, and we get many requests, for example, for 400 megahertz NMRs. We get a number of requests for that. So you need to have your proposal stand out against your peer level institutions if you're asking for a piece of research instrumentation. So it's important to note, and it's highlighted here, that it's the science that drives the request. Yes, people who review these proposals are nuts about instrumentation. They really love instrumentation, but they really love the science even more. That is, the request for the instrument needs to follow the science that is going to be enabled by this instrument. So describe compelling science and science training, research training that you are able to do with your instrument, and why it is that you are the ones who are best posed to do this kind of work. Also, if you wonder if reviewers will have a concern, almost certainly they will. I often get questions. Will reviewers be concerned that my institution is located in a geographically isolated region? Will the reviewers be concerned that our team doesn't have a strong publication record? Will the reviewers be concerned that the proposed research isn't of the cutting edge compared to some others? Those are the kind of things that you as a PI are considering when you're writing a proposal, but it's definitely a concern that reviewers are going to have if you are thinking about it as well. So my best advice is to address those issues head on. So if you are concerned about a particular issue, address that issue head on in the proposal so that reviewers, if they think about it, will have an answer to their question. That's the easiest thing to do, and it's not so easy to do when you're a PI writing a proposal, but it's much easier to do if you have that concern, not to ignore it, but to think about what would a reviewer ask if they see this piece of information. And as I've already mentioned, MRI, like other grants programs, is a competition. So what makes your proposal stand out? If you have a special program at your institution that broadens participation of research students in the STEM disciplines, leverage that, make it stand out. Not everybody has that same capability. So find a way to make your proposal stand out. If you have collaborations in the local geographic region that you can tap into, both either academic or in terms of the private sector. Think about internships, for example. Those are things that you should consider to make your proposal stand out. Next slide, please. And I have a bunch of individual items here in the last few minutes that I have, so I'm not going to dwell on them too much, I hope. Anyway, as you probably know, intellectual merit and broader impacts are the important review criteria for NSF proposals. And I've kind of faded them out here, not because they're not important, they're critically important, but there are other issues that you need to address in an MRI proposal to make your proposal competitive, that is, to stand out. As I say here in the first bullet, describe enthusiastically compelling research and research training activities. If you have a proposal and you say, we need a 500 megahertz NMR, I don't know why I keep returning to NMRs, but I do. Just because your competitor institutions that you're categorized with all have a 500 megahertz NMR and you need one just to stay competitive, that's not a very good reason to put it in the proposal. It's kind of a lackluster reason. So buy it or build it and they will come is a lackluster reason. Also describe why you are the best able or best positioned to do the work. So for example, again, if your research is going to be addressing water issues in desert regions, if you happen to be in the desert Southwest, compared to someone who's in a much more rainy region of the country, you probably have the ability to do that in a way that others may not be able to. I came to NSF 15 years ago from the California State University, Sacramento, and on our campus was an outpost of the U.S. Geological Survey that dealt with hydrology. So if you happen to be in that region and you can tap into other federal agencies that exist within your region, you are well positioned to be able to tap into collaborations that others may not be able to do. Also, again, what makes you unique, and that's something that we've addressed already. And remember that you are competing against your peer institutions, and MRI awards build institutional capacity. This is an important piece of information. There's that chicken and egg problem of, again, what happens if we don't have a strong publication record? Maybe that's because your institution doesn't have the instrumentation to enable research. So if you get the instrument, you'll be able to do research that will enable you to get a stronger publication record. You'll build institutional capacity. Think in those terms. Take what may be perceived as a weakness and think of this proposal as a strength to address that weakness. Next slide, please. And just a few more, because as is mentioned here at the bottom, there's a vast range of possible approaches, strategies, and designs for your proposal. I can't tell you what to do. It will depend on your unique situations. I'm just going to mention a couple of these. I think you'll have these slides available. But number one here at the top is being a good research scientist is one thing. Being a good manager is quite another. So MRI proposals require a management plan where you talk about how you are going to enable all of your researchers to access the instrument in a sufficient time periods to enable the research that everyone is proposing. You are going to be the ultimate manager of this instrument. just because you're a good scientist doesn't mean you're a good manager. So make sure that you convince researchers that there is a strong management plan in the proposal. Don't forget research training, which is different than education and outreach. What I do want to mention too, broadening participation is an important part of an MRI proposal. Having students that are underrepresented minorities. Some of the weakest proposals I get are from Hispanic serving institutions or historically Black colleges and universities, where they say that just because we are of this category means that we will be able to tap into these STEM-related students. That doesn't necessarily follow. So make sure that the reviewers know what specific activities you are going to do in order to broaden the participation, not only of the students, but of the team of scientists who are working on your project. Okay, next slide, please. And one last soapbox here, submit your proposal early. And by early, I don't mean like an hour early, I mean several days early. And check the proposal that is received, I should say, at NSF. Not the one you think NSF received, but print out the one that was received by NSF. Because if you look at it and you find errors, you can, before the deadline, resubmit and change your proposal, have an update to your proposal. But after the deadline, you can't do that. And we often get people who will say, I gave my sponsored projects office the wrong project description. Can I replace it? The answer is no, okay? It's not because we're bureaucrats, and I wanna always mention that, having been now at NSF for 15 years. It's a matter of fairness to all of these 600, 700, 800 people who are submitting proposals to NSF. So here's an example. It's a little bit dated, but 80% of MRI proposals are submitted typically on the last day of the competition, and 50%, a full 50% of proposals are submitted within 2 hours of the 5 p.m. local time deadline. Don't be that person. Submit over here on the left side where you have at least 2 or 3 days to print out the proposal as received by NSF and make whatever changes that you need to do before the deadline occurs. Okay, next slide, please. And I'm not going to dwell on this. I've pretty much run out of time, but please, if you're interested in projects that have a total project cost of greater than $4 million, that is the upper limit of MRI, please take a look at the Mid-Scale Research RI1 program. There's a new solicitation that just came out not too long ago, which is NSF 22-637, which is about the Mid-Scale RI1 program, Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure 1 program, which is for proposals with a total project cost between $4 and $20 million for research infrastructure. It is proposals require having a national impact or a priority as expressed by, for example, National Academy's decadal survey. So it's not about campus infrastructure. It's about national level infrastructure, but it's well worth your time to take a look if you are interested in something with a total project cost greater than the MRI program. So next slide, please. The deadlines here for the Mid-Scale RI1 program are coming up. There's a preliminary proposal required that's due on January 5th, and full proposals are only by invitation. And the larger version of Mid-Scale RI1, the solicitation is in the works, so stay tuned for that. Next slide, please. And with that, I will close and invite you to submit questions in the Q&A, and I look forward to seeing many MRI proposals at some future date, and stay tuned for the new solicitation. Thank you.
Okay.
welcome back. And I see that, Randy has answered a lot of questions in the Q&A as the presentation has been going. And so thank you for that. Randy, we do have a little bit of time for some additional questions. And I noted that early on, we got a number of questions asking about the pending solicitation, which, as you've said, has not come out yet. And I think you've pretty much said that we can't, there's only a limited amount that we can say about that, but it should be coming out soon. So I think I would rather instead of asking you the questions about, do you anticipate this, do you anticipate that? I think it's better just to move on to some of the other specific questions about MRI that we can perhaps focus on in these final few minutes. So first question that I saw that you did not answer is asking about the allowability or the cost of a dedicated technician for specialized equipment. Is that an allowable cost as part of the MRI proposal?
Yeah, the solicitation, if you look at the solicitations in the past, describe the fact that operations and maintenance costs are allowable during the award period. I don't anticipate that to change in the future. And operations and maintenance can be a warranty on an instrument, or it can be a technician to take care of the repair and maintenance of an instrument. It may even be a faculty member if, in fact, it's a primarily undergraduate institution that doesn't have the resources to hire a technician. So it depends on what the nature of the instrument is and what the nature of the organization is. So yes, salary requests are allowable if they are completely justified, and justified based on the complexity of the instrument. So a full-time person to take care of an instrument that only requires 5%, 10% time wouldn't fly. But if you actually can justify a faculty member or a technician, please go ahead and ask for it, because we do want the instrument to be well maintained.
Okay, next question related to broadening participation. Would specific activities to attract and train first generation and low income students count as broadening participation for an MRI proposal?
The devil's in the details. It certainly would be a broader impact that needs to be addressed in the proposal. So how you go about doing that? One thing that I will mention is that leveraging existing programs at your university or college is one great way to go about increasing broadening participation and convincing reviewers that you have a handle and have some potential for success in that area.
Okay, we have a question about the sustainability component of the management plan. How important is that? And can you talk about sustainability in terms of the long-term use and management of the equipment past the award period?
Yeah, that's a great question. The solicitations passed, and I anticipate this to continue into the future, require that there be a letter from someone who has seniority at the university, whether it's a dean or whether it's a vice president for research, talking about the commitment to sustain the instrument in terms of operations and maintenance. MRI awards typically go for 3 years for acquisition and up to 5 years for instrument development, because it takes longer to develop and test and mitigate risks in development proposals. And when you submit your final report, what we often and understandably get is a statement basically saying, thank you for providing our instrument. Now we'll do the science. But we don't know what happens in the next 5 years after the instrument has been commissioned and is in use. So having some statement by the university stating what the plans are for the long-term sustainability of the instrument is essential for evaluating that. And I will point out that based on our advisory committee some number of years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there was a desire to have the institution describe what is the status of the instruments that they have received over a period of time. So reviewers are very interested in that sustainability of the investments.
Okay. Next question is asking how current inflation might affect acquisition proposals with instrument quotes being higher than in previous years. Do you have anything on that?
No, that also is a great question. When you submit a proposal, you are supposed to, and your proposal will fare poorly if you don't, submit a vendor quote that is a typical vendor quote. So you may get 3 different quotes or 2, depending on whether or not there's even more than one vendor for an instrument. So make sure that there is an estimate for what the latest cost is. And before an award is made, program officers often and should ask for a revised quote to make sure that the quote is about the same price range as it was when the proposal was submitted. Realize that the review process takes about 6 months to go from submission to award when an award is made, and vendor quotes don't usually last that long. So we do understand that the final budget may be different. Realize too that vendors often give academic discounts for instruments, and going back to them and saying, hey, this is all the money that we have, oftentimes is sufficient to have the vendor eat a little bit more of the cost that they otherwise would have tried to use as profit. We are not in the business of trying to mitigate profits of vendors, but we do realize that vendors have some flexibility in terms of academic quote discounts for these kinds of instruments.
Okay, well, we are just about out of time for today. So I do want to thank you, Randy, for a great session. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We're going to put a link to a survey in the chat. So if you could fill that out, we greatly appreciate your responses. They'll help us shape future conference sessions. We will have a recording of this session on the Policy Outreach website and on our YouTube channel. And before you go, just be sure to take a look at the agenda for tomorrow. We will have a full day tomorrow of sessions covering all of the NSF directorates. There will be concurrent sessions. So if you haven't registered for any of them, take a look and see which ones you would like to attend. And we hope to see you there and have a wonderful rest of your day and evening. Thanks so much and take care.
Thank you all for attending.